In Dead Rising, you play as Frank West, a freelance photojournalist with a hot tip about something going on in a small town called Willamette. After arriving at the mall, Frank discovers he's in the middle of a zombie outbreak and has 72 hours to uncover the truth before his helicopter arrives to pick him up. It's a bit difficult to define what genre Dead Rising is. It's been described as a beat-em-up, which feels pretty accurate, but not completely. Your primary goals are to survive in Willamette Mall by using everyday items as weapons against the zombie hordes. There are scavenging elements, but it doesn't really fall into the survival genre. There are infinite amounts of items around and everything respawns on re-entry of an area, so you don't have to deal with limited resources. For healing, there are numerous coolers around the mall with limitless stocks of healing items, so there should be no struggle with health management. There really is no semblance of weapon balance. Most of the weapons are terrible and more of a novelty than actually effective. A core few are standouts in terms of effectiveness and availability. Then finally, there are a handful of weapons that are just straight up broken when combined with the various books that increase weapon durability. The one limiting factor here is inventory. Frank's inventory starts off pathetic. As Frank levels up, one of the most desirable upgrades is inventory space. The level upgrades you get are pseudo-random, which can lead to the early game having discrepancies, largely based around when certain upgrades become available. Movement speed, inventory, or attack upgrades will make the game much easier than an early upgrade to something like throwing distance. Frank also unlocks special moves as he levels up. A lot of these moves are something you'd see in a game like Street Fighter or in pro wrestling. They're fun and often surprisingly useful if you remember to actually use them. It's strongly recommended to learn some of the key moves, like the jump kick and the double lariat, since they will be invaluable in Dead Rising. Once Frank hits a high enough level, you're definitely in a position where weapons can be kind of optional with his special moves. The way you level up in Dead Rising is a bit unintuitive. The primary way to level up isn't killing zombies, it's taking pictures and rescuing survivors. Killing 100 zombies can be worth significantly less than one good photograph. Knowing to take a lot of pictures, what to take pictures of, and where to refill your batteries will be a fundamental part in getting through Dead Rising. Another core part of Dead Rising is what's commonly considered awful in almost every video game, which is escort missions. Most of the escorting is technically optional, but it's strongly encouraged as rescuing survivors is the main way you level up. Most survivors have special moments to take pictures of them for bonus prestige points, which can greatly increase your speed of leveling up. The survivor AI in Dead Rising varies from reasonable to completely idiotic, based almost entirely on number of survivors in your posse. Due to time constraints, you're often forced to escort multiple survivors out of necessity. These are some of the most frustrating sections in the game, but aren't overly difficult, it just requires a lot of babysitting. The soundtrack's main draws are the ambient mall music that plays while you wander around. All of the mall themes are surprisingly catchy and enjoyable despite being the video game equivalent of elevator music.
Forget it! It's over there! Not in a million years.
There are more upbeat and intense musical tracks during specific missions and the psychopath battles, which contrasts nicely with the standard ambient music. Cutscenes in Dead Rising are fully voiced, but the in-game dialogue is handled by on-screen text. It would be great if everything was voiced, but the delivery isn't always the best, so it's not a deal breaker.
Yeah,
You came alone?
Yeah, I'm freelance. You know, go on the battlefield alone, no crew. What are you doing?
The air ducts. They'll get us back into the mall, and apparently those things aren't smart enough to use the ducts.
The graphics are acceptable, considering it is a fairly early release Xbox 360 game. There are some growing pains with being on the new system. There is definitely an impressive level of detail, despite the graphics generally being only mediocre. Cleaving through zombies with swords or chainsaws causes them to be sliced apart in seemingly infinite ways. Zombies will react to getting hit by various things. You can break store windows, but it requires a strong enough impact. Dead Rising goes the extra mile and really gets the little details right. The things that you normally just wouldn't notice during regular play. The animations are a bit stiff and dated, especially the facial animations in the cutscenes, which, along with the voice acting, it leaves a little bit to be desired. That being said, there are a lot of fun and memorable moments that come from the script and delivery, so it's a bit of give and take.
Listen to me, and listen good, partner. I don't allow vandalism in my store!
Kinda. I've covered wars, you know.
The story at its core is a mystery, but it continually gives you tidbits of information at a pretty reasonable pace to keep you invested. It's very similar to something like Dawn of the Dead, where there are themes of consumerism and consumption. A lot of the psychopaths in Dead Rising are actually quite grounded in reality. Even though they are eccentric and definitely caricatures, they do still feel like normal people who just kinda lost it under these terrible circumstances. Dead Rising isn't very difficult, but it has a steep difficulty curve. A lot of the early struggles with Dead Rising are because of Frank being a weakling until around level 20, and you, the player, being ignorant to the more powerful weapons and more useful mechanics in the game. If you're stuck using soda cans or baseball bats, you're going to perform significantly worse than using superior weapons like katanas and mannequin torsos. It's a similar situation with your knowledge base about mixed drinks, like the Quick Step. If you know about them and utilize them, the game is a lot easier to get through, especially during the early hours and psychopath battles. This makes the various psychopath encounters have a huge variance in difficulty. If you have good weapons and are a high enough level, you can simply stand your ground and keep swinging. If you're underleveled or have inferior weapons, they can easily be some of the hardest parts of the game. The first psychopath battle can be a really eye-opening experience because it's so difficult so early on in the game, or you can just crush him in a handful of hits. Saying all that, your first attempt at Dead Rising should really be one of experimentation. Once you understand about the main mechanics and what weapons are powerful and the ways to increase their durability, the idea of scavenging becomes irrelevant. It becomes easy to quickly stockpile high-quality weapons and healing items with bonuses to trivialize almost everything in the game. Unfortunately, if you play like this, the game really does lose a lot of its fun factor and difficulty. So while it's satisfying to demolish psychopaths and the zombie hordes you encounter, it also makes the game a bit dull. You can play through Dead Rising with permadeath. After dying, you can restart your 72 hours at Willamette Mall over again while retaining all previous levels. This is a nice feature and probably one of the best and most fun ways to play Dead Rising, especially for first-time players. Dead Rising is a structured game and has a set runtime for the full ending. You have 72 in-game hours in the mall. One in-game hour is very roughly 5 real-time minutes. This gives you a grand total of about 6 hours of pure in-game time. Obviously, this calculation doesn't include things like cutscenes or loading screens. The timer really defines the Dead Rising experience. It's just not Dead Rising without the timer. The time constraints can be hard to deal with initially as it feels impossible to get everything done. It's definitely possible to do everything in a single playthrough, but only after you're experienced with the game and have understanding of what happens and when it happens. A full playthrough, completing all listed cases as well as the unlisted cases, rescuing all survivors, and overtime mode, Dead Rising was completed in 13 hours, 19 minutes, and 55 seconds. If you don't want to follow the main story and be simply left to your own devices, you can do whatever you want. There are multiple endings based on outcomes of choosing to follow the main story or to deviate. This is great because in conjunction with retaining Frank's level, it adds quite a bit of replay value. Willamette Mall isn't particularly large. You'll frequently be running through all parts of the mall, which is both good and bad. You will learn the mall's layout quickly, which is great since you won't be so reliant on your map, but after the first few hours, you'll be going through the same areas again and again and again. You'll quickly learn what shops and areas have the most useful things in them, so it makes a lot of the other shops worthless and seem like they're just there to fill space. Thankfully, throughout various points in the 72 hours, things will change up a bit. Events will occur which makes going through the same areas a little bit more interesting. There are a few extra modes in Dead Rising. Overtime mode should be considered part of the main story. There is also infinite mode where your goal is to stay alive as long as possible with continuous health drain. Food must be scavenged for in this mode and the coolers of infinite orange juice are gone. It's also every man for himself, so you'll end up fighting a lot of survivors. Dead Rising is an amazing game. It has the perfect blend of a serious narrative, but enough campy moments for levity. The story is fun and exciting, and it's got great, fun, memorable characters. The gameplay is simple, but fun and rewarding once you understand it. The features like New Game Plus and the freedom to choose whether or not to actually complete the various cases in your 72 hours in Willamette was a refreshing change. Unfortunately, it is a bit too easy to abuse the more powerful weapons and mechanics, which often leads to using the same handful of strong weapons on repeat playthroughs. It was one of the best Xbox 360 exclusives, and it still holds up today. Now it's also available on PC, PS4, and Xbox One, and it's a great addition to anyone who missed out on it while it was an exclusive title. Dead Rising is one of the greats, definitely one of the best games ever made. It should be considered required playing if you're serious about video games. Dead Rising gets recommended playing's most prestigious verdict of recommended.